Here's one that I've been trying to do for quite a while. It's the Diagram 313 Suburban Coach Composite Lavatory, or CL, with the aid of these brass sides that I obtained from Mousa Models and a couple of donor coaches, like the one you can see here from Bachmann. Of the 6 different versions of Suburban coaches on the short 57-foot frames, this one, the CL, is the most difficult one to reproduce in model form without the aid of the brass sides. Before I discovered that there was a company that was producing the brass sides for this variant, I did try and do it off of the standard Bachmann model, and I failed spectacularly twice. The brass sides supplied by Mousa Models are very nice. They even have panelling on the inside. I'm not sure if I'm going to be able to do something with that. My skills, we'll see. We'll get started by stripping down our donor coach, first by removing the bogies, then the body and the interior. Getting the body off should be a lot easier than the way I've portrayed it here. A little bit of applied pressure once you've got the lugs, the locating lugs disconnected, it should be quite easy. Picking out the glazing is relatively easy as well, just a couple of spots of glue. It doesn't really matter about this because we're not going to be reusing it. We're going to be doing a lot of cutting with the Dremel, so to relieve some of the stress in the body, I first of all cut out some slits right at the very end. The maroon one is probably the best one to do this conversion on because it comes with the printed lining at about the right height that I need to cut. So I'll just use that as a guide all the way along. I like to leave about 1 millimeter below the rain strip to be able to glue the brass sides onto, and I'll go back after this and tidy up everything with a big flat file and make sure it's all at the right depth. Taking notice of my amateur psychology lessons, I'm going to do the bits that I don't like doing first so that I don't not do them at the end, and that is the interior. While I've got the mess all over the place and the Dremel out, I'm going to cut the corridor sides out. I've marked them with some felt pen so it's easier to see where I'm going. I do think that this is the most worrying stage of a build like this, when you've just destroyed a perfectly good model. After a bit of a tidy up, I then cut out the internal compartment sides from a piece of 30 thou plasticard. I was rather hoping that I could get away with not doing a great deal to the internal structures, but as it turns out I fell into some old problems, and that being the fact that the compartments aren't a regular size, and it shows up drastically when you put the internals inside against the replacement brass sides. So reluctantly I had to undo everything that I'd done that far and start again, and I ended up cutting each individual compartment into 2 so that the seats and the back were separate from the floor. I then glued each one of them into the correct place onto the chassis. Now, I have seen in person and on the internet some absolutely stunning interior detailing on coaches. That's a dilemma that pretty much every modeler has to deal with. How much time and effort do you want to put into something that at the end of the project you can't really see? A reasonable representation is what I'm after. I did think that the only time the soldering iron would see this project would be soldering the vent into the toilet window. But then I come across the problem of attaching the door hinges. I did think I might be able to glue them on, but it came apparent quite quickly that soldering them was actually easier. I use a piece of plywood indoors for soldering small pieces on. It saves the cutting mat. and I pushed a small screwdriver into it to create a little dimple, into which I placed a door hinge. There's a hole on the brass side where the door hinge should be located. So once I've squared everything up, placed the brass side on top of the door hinge and then soldered through that hole onto the door hinge. And miraculously, I thought so anyway, it stuck and looked alright. However, 3 door hinges per door, 13 doors per coach, 2 coaches. Sometimes, depending on manufacturer, supplier, the brass sides for coaches come with a pre-formed tumble home. This one came flat. Creating that small curve at the bottom of the coach isn't that difficult. My bending tool isn't quite long enough, so I had to do it in 2 stretches. You can do it with a couple of steel rulers, with the sides gripped loosely, not nipped up tight like you would when you was bending a right angle, or a bit loosely. Then with a long straight edge, just lift it up gently and that slight curve will form. Before gluing the sides on, I made sure that I was going to get them on the right side, so the first and the standard ends were at the correct end. It's quite easy to differentiate between the 2 ends. There's on the first class end the high bar, which is the PASCOM communication butterfly assembly, and on the standard end it's the bar that's halfway up the coach end. And now for the sticky stage, gluing the sides on. There's 2 types of glue that you can use for this stage. There's either the contact adhesive, which is Gorilla or Unibond or Bostik, and then there's the 2-part epoxy, which is Araldite or whatever it's called these days. Both types of glue work equally well, and I have no preference. It's just what I feel like when I'm doing each one. A couple of pegs off the washing line will keep everything clamped in place until the glue completely sets. From personal experience, I've never had much success with etched primers on brass, which is why I use Halford's standard grey primer, and I've never had a problem with it. The only downside to using rattle cans is the fact that you can't control what comes out. So I tend to spray away from the model that I'm dealing with and then move the spray onto it, and from quite a distance away to avoid large build-ups. And then we can do, once the outside is done, we can give a quick blast on the internals just to make sure everything's covered. I let the primer dry for a couple of days before going back with the colours. First colour was oh, you know what I'm going to say, not black on the roof and the underframe and on the bogies. I used Revel number 9 on the roof primarily as a sort of base coat, because the rail match paints can be quite opaque. The next layer of paint on the roof was rail match dark roof grey, and then I used a lighter grey, I think it was Humbrol 57, to create what I call my tiger stripes on the roof, just picking out the panels in the centre. I then mix some rail match roof grey with some Humbrol 57 to create an in-between shade, and then spray that on the top lightly to soften the edges and create a bit of visual interest on the roof. The next colour is then obviously rail blue from Rail Match, and it was 3 coats, a thin base layer, a colour coat, and then a top thin layer as well. Over the last couple of months I've seen some absolutely stunning lining on some models, mainly aeroplanes, from Greg's Models and the Model Guy, and this inspired me to have a go at it myself. And I thought, what better place to start than with the yellow band up atop the first class compartments. But I bottled it and opted for transfers. The yellow first class band as a transfer is from HMRS, which I think is sheet number 23. And it's almost like pick and mix with transfers on this coach, because the number ones for the first class are from Model Master. I can't remember which sheet number it is though. The numbers were from Fox Transfers off of sheet 4212/1E. And just so we don't leave anybody out, the warning flashes were from Railtech. I let these dry for an hour or so, and then I let them dry for an hour or so, and then I sealed them in with a couple of coats of satin varnish. For the glazing, I cut a 20mm strip from a 40 thou plastic sheet of clear plastic. I then chamfered the edge to give it a bit of a curve to match the brass sides. I did this to give the sides a little extra strength and rigidity. It's probably not needed, but we all have our various different ways of working. Back to the sticky stuff, and if there's one piece of advice I could ever give you on this bit, is if you can feel your fingers touch the glue, stop what you're doing immediately, go and wash your hands and then come back, because having a massive fingerprint in the middle of a window pane on a model is really not what you want. I don't think gloves are the answer, because if you wear gloves you can't tell when your fingers touch the glue. And if you're messy like me, that's even worse, because it's just glue everywhere. Those handy pegs are back in use again. One thing I struggle with on the glazing side is the toilet window. Now it should be frosted glass, and there doesn't seem to be anything that's very suitable on the market to represent this at the moment. However, recently I discovered that on one of the tubs that I use as storage from the takeaway is a nice piece of frosted glass. And when I cut it out and put it in place, it looked really well actually. One of the last things to go on is the door handles. Now, it was a bit of a bonus having the glazing come down below that line, because after drilling through the glazing, and then I could then glue the door handles into the glazing, so it's got a bit more something to grip onto. And as the door handles go in and the handrails go on, I think that's the last thing to get attached. All that's left to do is a little bit of detail painting for the lamp irons, the RCH cables, and I think this bad boy's done. Let's put it together and have a look on the turntable. What normally happens is Brian buys two of these things and I build them. One for him, one for me. The payment being I build one for him. He needs to come round and choose which one he wants before I do anything further to this, which is why I'm not going to weather it straight away. I might do a little video about that. I might do. We'll see. I'm actually really pleased the way these have turned out. So rather than watching it go round on the turntable, let's watch it go round on the railway. With a nice filthy engine up front, the commuters are getting a good view of some previous projects as they round the corner into Tolmy Junction to pick some more customers up. As they make their way to work, I'm going to make my way back to the stash to see what I can build next. It's been really nice talking to you again. Thanks for watching. See you next time.